Something you should know about me is that I'm an indecisive overthinker. When I was asked to give this talk, one of the guiding questions posed to me was, how do you define hope? What an absolutely terrifying question to ask. One, to an indecisive overthinker, because how could I possibly settle on a definition? Two, terrifying question because life as we know it collapsed around us this past year. So who has been spending their time defining hope? But as I thought about this, I realized that I've never had a consistent definition of hope. Each time that I have felt hope in my life, I've always learned something from it. Kind of like morals from Panchatantra stories or Aesop's fables. So instead of attempting to define this very tricky, scary word, I thought I would share some anecdotes with you. The year is 2004. It was the end of the day at school, and I was standing with a friend near the school gate waiting for the school bus to take us home. Earlier that day, our teachers had told us that there would be a citywide strike the next day, which could mean that school could be cancelled. So naturally, my friend and I are in deep discussion about this. And at the conclusion of our conversation, I decided that I needed to say something profound to manifest. And so I went with, I really wish we won't have school tomorrow. Brilliant contribution to this conversation. My friend immediately stopped me and said something that has stuck with me ever since. She said, "Don't wish, hope, because if you hope, it will actually come true." I'm sorry, we have to stop because who told this 9-year-old this? How did she know this? Anyway, if this was a fairy tale, this is where the narrator would come in and tell you that the moral of the story is that hoping and wishing are completely different things and you shouldn't conflate them. Here I am, 9 years old, vigorously taking mental notes because my mind has just been blown by this idea. Fast forward, the year is 2005. I am 10 years old, a little bit wiser now, and laser focused on a single goal, convincing my parents that this would be the year to begin celebrating Christmas. Now, my family didn't celebrate Christmas, but I was watching American and British movies growing up, and so I was beginning to understand that I could make some gains out of this whole Christmas concept. So I insisted that we do all of the traditions that I'd seen on television. Buy a tree, decorate it, write letters to Santa Claus. Most importantly, expect gifts under the tree. My sister and I were busy writing our letters to Santa Claus with the lists of the things that we wanted. We were aiming high. I wanted an iPod, and my sister wanted a flute, orchestra flute to be specific. I remembered my lesson from my friend the year before, don't wish, hope. And so I channeled my hope straight into my letter to Santa Claus, folded it up, gave it to my dad, and asked him to send it to the North Pole right away. FedEx it if you must, it's important. A few days later, I received a letter from the man himself, Santa Claus, and it brought devastating news. Even though I had hoped with all my heart, Santa Claus said that I needed to memorize my multiplication tables 1 through 13, and only then I would be eligible for an iPod. So not only did I have to hope, but I had to work for it. Not that I was opposed to working for it, I just didn't know that those were the rules of hoping for something. Here I am thinking that I'm so clever for pulling off this elaborate Christmas gift scam, when in reality, I got Uno reversed, scammed instead. Now, if this was a fairy tale, this is where the narrator would walk in and tell you the grossly simplified moral, which is, you can want anything, and you can have it if you work for it. So simple. My 10-year-old self taking notes again, because clearly I don't have this hope thing down yet. Fast forward again, the the year is 2006. I'm working on a school project where we had to make a map of our lives from birth into the future. Now, a project like this needed a little creativity, a little imagination, but also ambition. At that time, I loved animals and environmental conservation, so with all this in mind, I began the project. I was a very ambitious 11-year-old because I had decided that by the year 2026, I would have saved all tigers from extinction. That's right, me. Now, in my defense, the year before I had learned you can't just hope, you have to work for it. Straightforward. And so I had determined by some calculation that 2026 would allow me ample time to work towards my tiger saving credentials. Makes sense, right? Wrong, because I have yet to save even a single tiger to this day. Now, the moral of this one is perhaps a bit more abstract, but if a narrator were to walk in, they would tell you that hope can change, and that's okay. Though these stories are small, I think they illustrate my point. I've never had a consistent definition of hope. My trajectory of understanding hope began with the idea that hope is just a casual emotion, nothing more than that. But as I grew up, I began to see how complicated it was, how many layers it had. Each time that I felt hope, the bus stop conversation, the Christmas scam, the school project, I learned something about my own notion of hope, but also about myself. Hope is a teacher. The philosopher Isabel Stengers once said that hope is the difference between probability and possibility. That gap between active and passive is one that I have thought about since the bus stop conversation, but haven't quite understood until now. I've come to interpret hope as the bridge between those two things. By hoping, I work and I stay accountable to myself in order to cross that bridge between this fear of the possibility of disappointment or failure to the very real probability of joy, success, excitement. Hope is action. Since I was younger, I thought that my hope had to be on a linear upward trajectory, getting bigger and larger than life as I got older. But with the year that we have had, I've really been struggling with this idea. Here we are, the year is 2021, and strangely, all I can muster hope for right now is to be a regular at a coffee shop. My younger self's version of hope was the equivalent of getting on a jet ski in the middle of the ocean at full speed, expecting to reach land. In reality, I think my hope is more like a canoe, one that can alter course, be set back, but ultimately keep moving because I keep rowing. Hope can evolve with you. Though I don't have the energy right now to keep hoping big, I continue to remind myself that even though my boat isn't moving fast, it is still moving, and that's something. Maybe my hope doesn't have to be as grand as saving all the tigers in 5 years, but perhaps it can be learning the barista's name, becoming friends with a neighbor, or recreating your mother's recipes. Even a few months ago, I wouldn't have considered these things actions of hope. But as I think about it, all of those things have taught me something about myself, and that is moving my boat forward. With time, maybe those small actions of hope can become ambitious, imaginative, and maybe even audacious once again.